So, aside from the silly sounding name, MOOC is an interesting concept to play around with. But one of the things that we'll talk about a little bit today, and that will become clear the more familiar with it you are, is that there are a lot of definitions of what makes up a MOOC. And there are a lot of people pinning different types of expectations onto what a MOOC might be able to accomplish. I think that regardless of your view, there are very interesting things to be learned from the format. And almost without a doubt, there are things that higher education as an institution needs to pay attention to in terms of what value are we providing as compared to the value that is provided through what a MOOC is. So let's talk just a little bit about it. A MOOC is a massively open online course, and you almost immediately begin to see some conflict in how people identify what open means. In its original sense, as it was put together by some faculty members and researchers, George Siemens is one of the original folks who was playing around with a format to deliver content to a big group of people. And open had a connotation of participation. There were no barriers to participation, but also to the content, that it used freely available content. And that has continued pretty much as a thread. But more recently, what has happened is there were some faculty members from Stanford University, notably, that taught a course in computer programming and had kind of a life-changing epiphany when they realized that with this experiment, they talked to over 10,000 people about their topic. And I think one of the things that resonates with those faculty who have participated is their message reached more individuals, more sets of ears in that 1 6-week experience than the university for which they worked has ever had in all time. and so from an individual perspective, there's some interesting points to be made about the reach of your audience. One of the biggest things, though, that we're going to be focusing on is reach to what end? The reach of hearing your voice is very different from the reach of a small group of graduate students working together towards a common goal. And so one does not preclude the other. But the core thing that I'm going to focus on again and again as we talk today is no matter how you define it, we should avoid throwing the baby out with the bathwater. You know, there's temptation to pursue the shiny object of a MOOC to feel like it's going to solve all of our problems. It has a lot of potential to teach us many things. But one of the ways I think that's helpful for me to think about it is, what is it like? What is it that we're comparing it to? And so I'd like to go over a couple of maybe unconventional ways to think about a MOOC. First of all, a MOOC as a very big book club, and a MOOC as a formal educational model, and finally a MOOC as a business model. And I'll say that for all of these and the topic in general, claiming to be an expert in MOOCs is kind of a silly thing. There is no expertise. There are sections of expertise, and sections of expertise in whatever you believe is a MOOC, but there is no theory of MOOCs. There is no common framework for referencing what it is we're talking about in MOOCs. So I'll do the best I can to share what I've observed, and I hope that you'll pitch in and let me know if you have any questions as we proceed. But I'd like to use these as kind of a framework for thinking about how is a MOOC similar to things that we're familiar with, and what new capabilities might it offer. So, a book club. If I am a social person and I enjoy reading, then it's likely that at some point I'm going to say, hey, similar interest people, why don't we get together sometime? Might be on a really informal basis. Meet at Starbucks after work on Thursdays and we'll talk about this book. Might be about one particular book. Or it might be an ongoing endeavor. But no matter how formally you're defining it, there are some common characteristics to what you might do in a book club. You're all going to have some common reference materials that you're going to be reviewing. And then you're all going to participate in some sort of dialogue about those. Now, there are fully online book clubs. There are community-hosted book clubs, political, religious, any theme that people read about. Book clubs are kind of a modality of engagement. So, if I'm...
Question?
Yeah, sure.
But basic to a book club is interaction between the participants.
Right. And I think that with a book club, there are a couple of, you might even break it out, there's no formal model for book clubs, but you might break it out into book club with a moderator and a book club that's just a bunch of friends getting together. And the with just a bunch of friends getting together, usually that dialogue is very informal. And even the structure is informal. But the better book clubs, as far as everyone enjoying it in an ongoing basis, almost always have some structure to them, and it can be very loosely defined. But I think your point is a very critical one, that reading a book on my Kindle is not a book club. The book club is the social interaction around that experience of reading my book on a Kindle.
So connected to that question then is, in what way is a MOOC like a book club if the essence of the book club is the getting together and discussing?
So depending on the model of a MOOC, one of the things that is fairly common with MOOCs is you're pulling the instructor interaction away from individual participants. But almost all of them have some venue, some discussion group, some forum for students to get together, and it usually actually even will break you into groups depending on the software that you're using. But the concept is much more similar to a book club in terms of, let's talk about the ideas behind chapter 3. And there's some structure that's provided by the course and by the instructor, but it's less like an online course where you're going to be interacting with the instructor on a regular basis.
So is it also more like a book club in that nobody really cares how much you learn?
I would say
you're
yes.
You're there for your own benefit,
Yep.
and you learn what you get out of it, and
I would say
move on.
in all of the current formats of MOOCs, I would say that's almost universally true. Yeah. So once you agree to gather together, you have a place. And the place might be someone's living room, might be the coffee shop, it might be online. In addition to an agreement of community, a location, what you probably will establish some sort of a schedule and some type of agenda. For some, it's which wine will we be drinking, and everything just kind of, blurs after that agenda point. But again, it's a social event as much as it is an information event. But the two are nicely paired for people who want to learn things throughout their lives. That opportunity to socialize and to learn something is a heady mix that's very tempting. You would not suggest that this was equivalent to taking a night course at your local community college. No one would ever suggest that one should replace the other, or that you shouldn't do one because the other one exists. So appropriately placing the format in your mind partially, I think, requires an acknowledgement that it doesn't have to necessarily replace anything to have value.
There's another point about book club that probably should be brought up, educational point of view, and that is that in a book club, there isn't really an authority.
Yep.
So, that information can get passed on as good information.
Absolutely, absolutely. And probably quite often does.
Right.
Right.
So when we talk about educational venue, we don't really want to be passing on that information.
So the second simile that I'd like to present is kind of a loosely coupled concept of what it means to provide an education. And immediately there are going to be people who freak out. I'm missing something, I'm using something that's too colloquial, but this is just my attempt to talk about what are the pieces to the puzzle when we're thinking about what does it mean to get an education. And I think that place is one component of an education. And we'll talk about how that might vary, but the consideration of place is one of the variables. One of the reasons we come to a university in particular is there is a community aspect to learning, that whether it's interaction with my peers, interaction with my mentors, interaction even with information resources, and that community, which is tightly bundled with place traditionally, bleeds over into content. So we have libraries, and even today our library is just an amazing collection of electronic information resources alongside physical resources. I've loosely called it coaching because I want to try and use the model in various places, but the role of instruction and of guidance, and this could be all the way from very formal to very informal, but this is crucial in our traditional model. And I would say that out of all of those we expect certain types of performance. We have certain measures for participation, and we have some form of certification that says, check, 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 you passed. So bear with me, it's a bit of a complex model to kind of throw out in a 20-minute presentation, but in a traditional education setting then, if this is our classroom and our campus, then we have classmates, faculty, staff that represent a community. We have lectures, textbook, library, e-content. We have instructors and advisors that represent that coaching overlap. And then over here we use tests and grades for performance. We have hours as one of our standard measures. This degree requires this many hours of participation. And we have certification and formal diploma at the end that is your evidence that you participated. So if we move then to an online course, it's a sidestep. We're still using the same organization, and so very little differs. The location is different. We now maybe, our place, quote unquote, is all in a learning management system. But we still have access to the same electronic resources. We still have the same expectations of the participants for the hours of commitment in most places that represent meaningful interaction around a course or around a program. We still use mostly the same formats for gauging participation and for scaling participation. So in a MOOC, there are a few things that change, and they change substantially. The MOOC platform may be just a loosely coupled Gmail for this and this discussion group or wiki for that. So much less control, which opens it up to much broader participation. But if you're thinking about replacing the experience of a campus experience, the lack of control here introduces some variables. I don't suggest that that's a good or a bad thing, but that's a different environment that you're working in. The community, what you're doing is almost completely extracting any relationship to mentor faculty, to staff members, advisors, those kinds of things. It's either group work in an online environment with classmates, or you're on your own. And for the right person, this is such a boon. There are so many people in the world who now, through this format, have access to experiences that they would never, in any stretch of their imagination, have access to in any other way. And so that can't be discounted. But when we come over here, the differences are even more apparent in terms of, instead of tests or assessments, if there are assessments, and lots of MOOCs just don't even have assessment at all as a part of their model. But if there are assessments, they're quite often peer assessments or machine assessments, depending on the discipline. There's very little consideration for, I mean, the time here. There's no, like, there's not the same requirement that says in order to get your badge you have to sit through this many X's. If there is a badge to be had, you could never log in to the entire course and go to the badge test, take the badge test. If you get it, you're good. There is no measure that says you can't take the badge test until you've had this many hours of engagement. And finally, the certification. At this point, there's some exploration of platforms like badges and open certification, but mostly there's, you can print out a PDF saying I took my course, and this is where a lot of the activities going on with universities is, what does it mean to acknowledge what has happened in this kind of an environment, and is there any room for prior credit, for example, to be given if you can certify that you participated and passed a MOOC? Is there room for consideration of credit in a traditional university environment? That's going to be where a lot of the conversations are happening in the near future, and already are happening. In fact, just yesterday there was a press release from San Jose. Is it San Jose State University? University of California system, and they have partnered with, I think it's Coursera. They're a small handful of big players here, and if you're familiar with our University Foundations courses, what we have is a plenary session that's taught by faculty members, team taught, team designed, and then we have discussion group sessions that are led by discussion group leaders who may not have the same credentials in the discipline, but are fully trained and fully engaged with facilitating the dialogue around what we talked about in the plenary session. There's a similar model being implemented in this University of California system, where students participate in the MOOC, and that's the equivalent of their plenary participation. And then they have on-campus breakout sessions that are discussion groups that have assignments and activities and everything that draw from that MOOC experience. In their particular case, I think that MOOC is kind of built to accommodate what they're doing. But with the right licensing, you would never even need to know that these 30 students in this huge 10,000 student MOOC were doing anything. I mean, it wouldn't change the interaction within the course, the MOOC, at all. It's just what you're doing with it and around it at that local campus that represents the pathway to credit or to certification in a traditional sense. So one of the things to pay close attention to is, if you are your own coach, then if you are a good self-coach, this can be a very powerful platform. If you are an incoming freshman who's not sure what you want to do with your life, the most motivated people that I know who have taken a MOOC, very few of them have gone all the way through. And these are people who are very interested and very engaged and highly intelligent and self-disciplined, and life just got in the way and I didn't get all the way through it. The attrition rates in MOOCs are just insane. I mean, and it's okay because nobody's paying for anything. There's no real consequence to it. But when you see 100,000 student participation for one particular course, that's the people who were registered on day one. If you look at the people who took the final exam, it may be 400 people.
Wow.
I mean, the percentages are insane, the number of those that drop out. I mean, and it varies by platform and experience, but it's nothing like the attrition kind of percentages that we traditionally think of in higher ed.
But for that freshman who doesn't know what to do, what a good way for them to see what's out there.
Oh my gosh, and some of the conversations we've had on this campus with faculty there was an English student, and the English student was struggling in the course that they were taking, and the instructor, in talking to them, found out they had an interest in cryptography. There's no cryptography course at Boise State. That was an intro level kind of that was appropriate for them to dig into. And so she kind of, as an aside, said, "Hey, you might want to take a look at this." And then when they came back later, unsolicited, they were saying, "Wow, this is life changing. I'm looking at our courses. I'm looking at kind of changing my major." And it's anecdotal, but it's the kind of, because there's such a low threshold to participation, it's a really interesting way to think about giving students a variety of experiences with very little cost or investment, in many senses of the term. So, as long as we're acknowledging the outcomes here, and we're holding that constant in our consideration, I think there is just amazing amounts of potential that we can have from here. So if we have constant time requirement, rich sense of place and the environmental requirements, and a formal certification process, then we have an expensive environment that doesn't scale very well. That's okay, but these are characteristics of our current higher ed environment. And so you can then say, if you have a more open time frame, now MOOCs are not like open entry, they have a schedule, but it's more open and the participation's not measured. You have an online sense of place, and you have an informal certification process that allows you to deliver things less expensively and on a much bigger scale. But it's just crucial. I'll just return to this again and again and again. If this is okay, then those benefits are substantial. So the business model is TBD. There are tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars venture capital money that's being plugged into these platforms because of the reach that they have. And the capacity to, we were just talking just before we started, and there's been exploration that says, well, what if you could pay a small fee, and for $10, then we'll give you a test and we'll certify, we'll give you the badge. $10 seems like pocket change, but if you're dealing with tens of thousands of participants in any given course, the potential for scalability and for a profit model is substantial. These entities are looking to partner with universities, and I think the details that work out will be interesting. I think that their contracts are written in ways that are that restrict how a university can use their interactions and content for credit. At least the way they're written, they basically say that a university can't give credit for these without their permission. And so that's one of the potential avenues for their profit model is partnering to provide those, but there will be a cost involved if that's the case. Now, on an informal basis, I mean, who are the MOOC police? You know,
how do they enforce that?
I think it would be that if you had a program that says, here's the intro curriculum, and you have to take these online courses and these 3 MOOCs, and that represents the core, and it's a documented use of their facilities for your credit, then that's the kind of thing I think that they're trying to avoid without a formal partnership. But
like transfer credit from other universities.
Yeah, I mean, I think when it really comes down to it, I think they've written the contract in a restrictive way so that they have options.
Right.
But I mean, you know, it's really hard to imagine what any kind of enforcement or what it would be that they were trying to preclude. You know, the bottom line is they're not certain what their profit model looks like yet.
Right.
And so whether the courses assess a small fee or whether it's universities paying for use of their platform or for use kind of piggybacking off of courses. I mean, there are a number of different ways. So far, the courses that are taught are by invitation only. And what they do is try and identify some rock star faculty member who's written a great, super popular book and is it really engaging. And so it's a very selective participation on the part of those who are teaching this so far. Now, edX is a little bit of a different beast. This is Harvard and MIT, a consortium that is in a number of ways different. edX is built upon the open content initiative that they've all participated in as well. It was built on that as an assumption. And so you can actually use their content. I mean, it was originally available, you know, for free, and now they're using it as building blocks for their interaction. But a lot of universities are trending in this direction, in part because of that openness of the content and the lack of any proprietary gotchas that may come down the road. So they're a little bit on a different level, and these are not the only ones by any means. You could even argue that Khan Academy, iTunes U, the other things that have been more established for a while could be bundled into MOOC space. These are the ones who are taking the lead on the marketing and branding of the concept and trying to define it very, very clearly for their purposes, which is good. I mean, they're doing great things. But it's, again, important to kind of fall back on the fact that a MOOC is not a MOOC is not a MOOC. So I believe opportunities, there's buzz here, and while we don't want to drink the Kool-Aid, they're piggybacking on the interest and on the investment that's going on in these platforms may give us some opportunities to explore things that we might not be able to explore otherwise. And there just really is something there, I think, that we can incorporate within higher ed. The potential to reach many students is really attractive. I mean, especially if what you're thinking about is somewhere between the brochure that we send out to prospective students and matriculation in a grad program. You know, along that continuum, probably along on this end, is potentially some interaction with Boise State University that delivers value and content and meaning and doesn't have the same requirements or expectations of a full degree program, but complements the array of options and for engagement. Low cost is kind of a no-brainer. That's one of the big reasons that so many people are participating. The next steps. Considering MOOCs as content. And is that MOOC as a whole entity is that taking some of the open content and considering how you might incorporate it. As an instructor, as you're building a course, if you think of this as all kind of a newfangled textbook, which chapters would you assign? What would the assignment for participation look like? I think there are some interesting things to consider here. Exploring MOOC delivery. A lot of universities that are participating are delivering a local course just like they always have. And interestingly, it seems to be more often that it's a face-to-face course locally and a MOOC simultaneously. So those local face-to-face students are enrolled in the MOOC. The content that's delivered is the same for all participants, but that local experience is much more in line with a traditional face-to-face environment. And would this be an on-campus MOOC hybrid? I mean, there are a number of different potential models we might utilize. This is collectively, I think we could experiment with where does this fit in that portfolio of experiences, ways that you might engage with Boise State. And especially in places where it's not necessarily replacing anything. It's creating a window of opportunity for many, many people who would otherwise never have anything to do with Boise State to have an experience with us. The challenges, comparing apples to oranges. I mean, we do ourselves a disservice if we have just one big blunt hammer of a MOOC that says, let's run around looking for the nails that this solves. A sustainable business model is a challenge for the concept as a whole, and the astronomic dropout rates. I think, again, depending on your expectation, it's fine. I mean, we don't say that a website has astronomic dropout rates if it's unsuccessful. We don't think in those terms. But because we're edging into education land here, hopefully, then that huge percentage of people who drop out may ultimately become, you may see that buzz decreasing over time as more and more people, if they became disillusioned with the format. And so I think as a concept, it needs to figure out how to deal with that in some way. So if you're interested, I've put together kind of a list of resources. There's an EDUCAUSE list of 7 things you need to know about a MOOC, and links to a number of the recent news articles. So if you type in this URL, it's the same as this one. This is just a shortcut. Or if you want to use the QR code, you can go there with your mobile device. And I would welcome any, obviously right now, dialogue and content, but ongoing. I think this is a topic of discussion that we should be engaging in, on campus. So what do you think?
Well, I've tried. So I just sit back here. You want me
No, I think you're good.
Okay. I'm one of those studious ones, so I checked into 2 of them, and I didn't. I got all the way up to the point of engaging in the class, and then I didn't do the class. But I was astounded by how many. I expected 1,000 or a couple thousand, and 23,000 was really astounding to me. And then really understanding the peer review, and the one instructor made it very clear that whatever grade that you received from the peer review and who you were interacting with, through one instructor was using blog through Tumblr, someone else they have the way it was set up online. That was it. There was going to be no discussion on your grade. So I think that's a little bit problematic. And I had a friend who, she's very intelligent, submitted an essay and received a poor grade. And it was a little bit insulting, but she didn't understand why. She misunderstood the question or, the parameters. So there's some frustrating aspects there in trying to get feedback on what you're looking at or how you're participating. Yet still it's impressive, the scope of topics and the ways the instructors and professors are trying to get people to interact.
Anyone else? Has anyone else played around in a MOOC, taken a class?
Well, I didn't take a MOOC, but I did use MIT's online lectures quite a bit when I was working on my degree.
Okay.
as a resource to explain the stuff that I wasn't understanding in class.
Yeah,
So you could go in and watch their presentation of the same concept.
right.
And I found it very useful.
That's really interesting. And then as an instructor, it's also then interesting how might you position, I mean, it's almost like like the links at the bottom of the Amazon page on the book that you're reading that say, other people who are interested also.
Right.
Well, how might we reference some of this content in our courses and for our students in a way that doesn't suggest too much significance, that it's in a referential kind of way.
Well, I think, even on a regular basis, students come and say, where can I get extra resources? Right? And that's what I saw it as, is this huge extra resource where I could hear the same concept presented by a different person.
So as faculty members, what could Boise State do? What could we do to help identify those kinds of resources? I mean, what form of help would be best for faculty members?
Give us time to take it.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, definitely that.
Yeah.
I mean, I've been on those web pages and I looked at it, and I mean, actually, the math ones that I saw were they looked different. That was the interesting thing. I mean, I didn't really see too much. I mean, when it was the basic stuff, but there was a calculus too. I actually was kind of like looking on, and it was very non-traditional. It looked very interesting. And I knew the name of the mathematician. He was a very famous mathematician from Penn State. I mean, who actually had set that up. And it looked really like something I would be interested in seeing myself. It seemed to involve all the stuff that I always think we should change the calculus course to make it better.
Yeah.
It seemed to be there.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I mean, I'm serious about that. I mean,
Yeah.
because I think it takes time, really. I mean, you can't just kind of like go in there probably and look like for, you really need to go through the whole experience also, I think, to get a feeling for it.
One of the models that we've talked about in something like that, like a Calc 2 course, is to actually develop a set of mastery quizzes, base them on one of the MOOCs, give them the opportunity to take those quizzes here as many times as they need.
Right.
And then if they get the mastery quiz, they pass all the mastery quizzes, that guarantees them a C- in the course. And then our job would then be project management, group work,
Right.
in order to get up to a C or a B or an A. And one of the things that BSU could do for us that would be nice is, so these mastery courses, we want them to be able to take these quizzes anytime and as many times as they want. So we can't schedule the testing center.
Right.
Because we don't know when they're coming in.
Sure.
But what would be nice is if every computer in the lab had a fisheye lens on top, that they could swipe their ID, the lens is on, we can see their hands, we can see everything, and then we hire graders to go through this at 10 times to make sure nobody's cheating. And that way they can take the quiz as many times as they want. We don't have to worry about it.
Lower the threshold for proctoring,
Right.
but still have some capacity to kind of verify
Exactly.
who they were and
And
what
in
they were
fact, the
doing.
course that Uwe's talking about, when they get credit for that, they have webcam proctored exams,
Right.
which are much more secure than me watching
What
40
we have.
students.
Yeah.
Right, because they're recorded and I can go
Right.
back and look. So,
No, I think, and we've actually done a little bit of research there, and that's when they take those exams for credit, they have to pay the fee for the proctoring for that test. But I think that's a really interesting thing to look into as a campus.
and if the campus invested in it, they could become proctors for these MOOCs
Right,
all over
right.
the world
Right.
and collect fees that way.
Yeah.
Might even pay for the equipment.
Yeah.
So,
I definitely think it's a good thing to look into, to dig into that.
No, it's just, I mean, it's a fascinating, a situation here, and, there's definitely pros and cons. And what I liked the professor was he was teaching the history of the internet, which I'm sorry I dropped out. But you had until 3 weeks, 8 weeks, you had until 3 weeks to, enroll in the course, and then he just dropped the enrollment. But nothing kept me from still looking at the material. But even he said, we're breaking ground here, and just this constant figuring out on how to have productive feedback or make it useful. And yet, all the while, you do have to know that it's for my information only. But I do like the idea that you can go and explore topics before you pay these astronomical, fees for the college experience anymore. So you get a sense of what you might like. But I'm really beholden to liking that it goes towards something. So it's a little difficult to just be doing it to do it and not thinking that it's applying towards a PhD or something.
Right.
I had the feeling when I finished that there were no limitations. Anybody could get a degree. There are so many resources out there if you just take the time.
Yeah.
But in terms of what BSU can do, it would be cataloging information by content.
Right.
So students could go in and say, I think I'm interested in cryptology. What is out there on the internet? They click on cryptology and it gives them 100 different websites that they can explore, or 10 different websites, or whatever.
Right.
Maybe some sort of a catalog. It seems to me, however, that would be an ongoing process because it's always expanding. There's always new stuff on it.
Yeah.
And maybe Google has just already done it for us.
Well, I think there's room, and I don't know how to do it because it comes back to time for faculty members, but how could we create an environment where we allow faculty to it's that curation of those links and the kind of, right, that identification of the quality versus the quantity, because it's Google will give you the quantity. But how could we have someone local that looked at it and said, this is new thinking, or this is deep thinking about an old topic, or
And maybe that has to happen by department.
yeah, I think it's where it happens best. But I think maybe we could, as an institution, come up with mechanisms to facilitate that. What might that look like?
One of our calculus groups took. We were looking. It was a chain rule, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm.
So we did the Khan Academy and MIT and one other thing on the chain rule, and we just all wanted to look at it. And on each one of the three, we had instructors that said I would never have my students look at that, but they varied.
Yeah, right.
So one instructor would not have anyone look at this; the other one preferred it. So,
right. Which it essentially comes down to, I think, part of what's valuable about being at the university is that it's not the one size fits all.
That's right.
There's room for that, and we can leverage that. But it's like, how can we maximize that customization of engaging with local professionals while still kind of tapping into this ethos that's this the whole world.
And what about peer review? As faculty members, you often will have teaching assistants, but how if you consider that you're broadcasting to 23,000 students, how do you set that up?
I'd have to
what
pretend
is
like I
peer
wasn't.
review?
I don't get freaked out by much, but I think I would be freaked out a little bit thinking that there were tens of thousands of people. I don't know. It just seems.
You just probably have to ignore it.
Yeah,
I
think so.
That's it.
Yeah. You just do what you always do.
Right. You just pretend that nothing's on the web. And everything's on the web.
Right. Well, good. We'll have a follow-up. Dr. Ross Perkins from the Department of Ed Tech is going to be doing a session next week. And then the following week, we're going to have a panel with several people to kind of talk through and think through some of the implications. So I really appreciate your participation. It's been a good conversation.